I'm at Grantstown Lough, a beautiful country setting in County Laois, nestled between Ballacolla and Rathdowney, in a region once known as Upper Ossory. Grantstown is a charming and romantic place, with its lake and surrounding woodland, its old well in the wood, its crannog, its castle, its beautiful walks, the crown of Ossory, and fertile fields to be seen for miles around. Today I'm going to tell you the legend of Grantstown Lough, as written by the 19th century poet and storyteller John Keegan of Shanahoe. This legend, which Keegan titled The Fairy's Revenge, was first published in April 1846 in a London publication called Dolman's Magazine. In the words of Keegan, the legend goes as follows. In times long ago, there was no lake in Grantstown, but the spot now buried beneath its blue waters was a lovely and fertile vale, decked in the season with daisies, primroses, bluebells, and all the other wildflowers peculiar to Irish scenery, and which nowhere bloom in sweeter luxuriance than in the rich plains and sunny hedgerows of Upper Ossory. In the middle of the valley was a beautiful spring well, whose waters gurgled through those flowers of which I have spoken, in a little babbling, rippling stream. At any rate, it was a bonny well, that well of Grantstown, and a very deep well too, so deep indeed that many a one said it had no bottom at all. But supposing it had not, where was the wonder? For it was a fairy well, and everybody in Upper Ossory said so. At the time I speak of, there stood on a little mount, overhanging the vale, a rude and ugly-looking little cabin, and this poor little hut was inhabited by a very old and very feeble and very simple-minded woman named Maya Lee, or Grey Mary Slattery. There dwelt with her 2 or 3 little gorsoons and a little girsha, not her own children indeed, but the children of her only daughter, blooming Rose Slattery. But she did not bloom at this time, for she was dead and rotten, and so was her husband in the neighbouring churchyard of Bordle, over a piece from the valley. Well, one summer came, and brought with its flowers and glories hunger and sickness and destitution to the poor people of the country. There was no such thing as potatoes in the world in those times, and the corn had been blasted, and the swine and cattle had all died of distemper, and no food could be had for love or money in the wide districts of Laois or Upper Ossory. Green weeds and grass and the leaves of the trees were greedily devoured by such as were able to devour them, and those who were not died of hunger and its deadly companions, bloody flux and typhus fever. One lovely evening in July, after the red round sun had sunk behind the Devil's Bit mountains, poor Maya Lee sat at her cabin door, her heart bursting with grief and her limbs trembling with hunger, whilst the poor little orphans were crying around her, calling on their dead father and mother to come from the grave and fetch them food, or take them to themselves, where they would find peace in the cold, dark clay of Bordle churchyard. "Easy a Vordine Macree," cried the old woman, wiping the tears from the face of the youngest gorsoon. "Easy a store, who knows what looks in store? It's an old saying, when times are at the worst, they'll surely mend, and maybe God and the Blessed Virgin would send us some relief before the morning." Just as she spoke, a shadow crossed the cabin door. She looked up, and a little old hag, the smallest and queerest looking little body she had ever laid her eyes upon, entered the hut. She was crooked and wrinkled. Her hair was full as grey as Maya's own. She wore a little crimson cloak, and her head was bound up in a blood-red silk handkerchief, beneath which her white hair was tied as tight and smooth as if she was a blooming young damsel on the lookout for a husband. "Good evening to you, Maya Lee," said the strange little hag as she entered the cabin. "Good evening kindly, and God save you," replied Maya. "Keep your breath to cool your porridge," replied the hag, her little ugly features assuming an expression of the most fiendish malignity. "Keep your breath, for I did not ask your benediction." "I wish I had porridge," answered Maya. "If I had, I could find breath to cool it, besides breathing a prayer for the good of my neighbours." "Are you a good neighbour?" asked the stranger rather calmly. "I always had the name of one," replied Maya. "I want the loan of a pot to boil my supper," continued the hag. "Will you lend me yours?" "With a heart and a half," replied Maya. "I have no supper to boil, and no business of a pot, and even if I had, I would not refuse a fellow creature on a pinch." "Thank you, Maya Lee," said the old dame, seizing the pot, which stood full of water from the well, for the children to drink during the night. "May I ask you, where do you live?" said Maya. "It's queer that I never saw your face before." "No matter," answered the other. "Your pot must come home safe and sound in the morning. And now a good night and pleasant dreams to you, Maya Lee." So saying, she took her way from the cabin, warning its inmates not to dare to look after her, or she would smash the pot into smithereens and sell it for grissets to Laois Harney the tinker. The balmy summer's night was not long passing away, and poor Maya was up before sunrise to pull some chicken weed to boil for the children's breakfast. "But what will I do for the pot?" she cried. "That old hag did not bring it home according to promise." "You lie, Maya Lee," cried the well-remembered voice of the little red woman outside the door. Maya, in surprise, ran and opened the crazy old door, and behold, what did she find but her pot full to the brim of fine hot stirabout, and a big roll of yellow, sweet-looking butter swimming in a great hole in its centre. "Glory on high!" shouted the overjoyed Maya. "Get up, childer dears, and eat your fill. It's well I told you last night to trust in God, and I made no botch when I said, when times are at the worst, they're sure to mend." The half-famished children scrambled around the pot, and the stirabout and butter was soon gone, as Maya herself remarked, where the neighbours' dogs dare not smell it. That day they were relieved from the pangs of hunger, and they were happy, peaceful and contented. Evening arrived, and just as the sun went down, the little red woman came again, took the pot, and disappeared in the same mysterious manner as on the preceding night. And next morning the anxious and restless and wonder-stricken Maya found it, as before, at the threshold, full of the beautiful stirabout and golden butter, looking so tempting in the light of that glorious sun, that the biggest paunched alderman of our rottenest old corporations would not disdain a nibble at it that fine July morning. But to make a long story short, this continued for several successive days, and there was not so well-fed or happy a family as Maya and her little orphans in the broad kingdom of Upper Ossory. One evening the strange little woman, and in troth she was a strange body, came again for the pot. "Maya Lee," she said, "I am very troublesome to you, but when this night and tomorrow night are past, I will trouble you for no more. I am going out of the neighbourhood. I got orders last night to go, and you must know that when we are commanded here or there, we must not refuse obedience." "Oh, murder, murder!" cried Maya. "The cure is worse than the disorder. What will become of myself and the Grauls when you go, and the hunger and the sickness still raging as bad as ever all over the country?" "When times are at the worst, they're sure to mend," replied the old hag, and taking up the pot, she strode away. "Bedad," said Maya, wiping her eyes, "she's a queer body. Indeed, by my soul, it's a fairy she is, and nothing else, and if the cat went to pound, I will have a peep after her. Sure she can't have peepers at the back of her skull anyhow." So saying, she went to the cabin door, looked after the retiring figure of the old red woman, and you may guess her surprise when she saw her walk up to the well, raise the wooden lid by which it was constantly covered, and descend, pot and all, into the depths of the earth beneath the fountain. "Right again," shouted Maya, clapping her hands in ecstatic surprise. "It's well I said she was a fairy. I always suspected it, and now I know it." The next day was one of the most uneasy that poor Maya had ever seen roll over her head. The fairy woman was to visit her for the last time, and what on earth to do for food for herself and the poor babes she could not tell. But Irish women, heaven smile on the creatures, are ever fertile in invention, and a happy thought flashed on the brain of Maya Lee. What that thought was, we shall see presently. Just as the sun went down, the ugly face of the red hag appeared again at the door of Maya's cabin. "Maya," she said, "I'm coming for the last time to ask the pot. I know you won't refuse me now, no more than ever." "Throton, I won't," said Maya with a tear in her eye, "but devil a drop of water is in the cabin, and I have no vessel in which to fetch it, only the pot. So sit down, agra, while I run for a sup to the well. I won't be as long out as you'd be saying, Jack Robinson." The red woman sat down, and Maya hobbled off, filled her pot, and fastened down the lid on the well, and then crossed it with the sacred sign in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. "Now," cried Maya, "let her get in if she can. If she can't, which I suspect very shrewdly, she must give me a purse of gold as long as my arm, and a bag of meal that would load an ass, or devil a nose of hers shall ever enter the Grantstown well." "Will you be there all night?" cried the old woman peevishly, as Maya delayed and fidgeted about the well. "Come down," answered the other, "the pot is here for you. I'll not take the water, for now I recollect, there's enough in the old cracked greybeard under the dresser." The fairy woman came out, took the pot, and went to the well, but on coming to the mouth of it, and stooping to lift up the lid, she uttered a cry, hoarse and loud enough to shake the walls of the old church of Bordle, although that was nearly a mile from the vale of Grantstown. Maya Lee," she shouted, "what's this you done?" "Go light a wisp and try," answered Maya. "Maya Lee," she cried again, "come raise this lid, and let me into the well, or I'll make you rue the day you ever seen the red fairy of Grantstown. Devil a hawk, if you come out as big from your mammy, barring you give me meal enough for the season, and as much gold as will pull myself and my 7 generations 9 days' march before poverty," said Maya. "Is that what you say?" shouted the hag, in a voice which made the grey rocks of Sheen Hill leap from their foundations. "I be dad a Churamachree," answered Maya, most provokingly unruffled. "Well then," roared the fairy, "as I cannot go into the water shall come to me." And so saying, she plucked a white hair from beneath her red skullcap, muttered some words over it in an unknown jargon, flung it in the air, and gave a whistle which aroused every echo of the silent valley and the grey ruins of Fitzpatrick Castle. Instantly a thundering sound was heard rushing from the well. The wooden lid flew into the clouds with a terrific noise. Immense volumes of silvery water foamed from the fountain. It overspread the vale. The red woman disappeared. Maya ran as fast as her old limbs could carry her to the cabin, and dragged away the children to a place of refuge. The water still rushed forth, and next morning, when poor Maya Lee returned to look after her cabin, with perhaps some lingering hopes of a pot of stirabout, one wide waste of waters met her gaze, and the lovely vale was then, and remains from that day to this, entombed beneath the bright and waveless waters of Grantstown Lough. The valley was entirely submerged beneath the mystic willows, and the fountain ceased throwing forth its liquid fury. But the red woman, with the vanity of her sex, was anxious for a further display of her powers, and scarcely had the well ceased belching forth its horrors, when suddenly a mighty whirlwind sprung up from its recesses, swept over the newly created lake, rushed on mad pinion through the broad territories of Fitzpatrick and O'Moore, levelling and destroying houses, towers, cornfields and trees as it went on its wild career. After the termination of 1 day and night, however, the storm was hushed. The skies of Ossory smiled as sweetly blue as ever, and the waters of the lake looked so bright and smooth that one might see his face in them as in a mirror. On examination, the waters were found swarming with fine fishes of various shapes and sizes, but all of excellent flavour and good food. The people of the neighbourhood caught them in abundance, and strange to say, their numbers suffered no diminution until the scarce season was gone by, when all at once they disappeared, and were never seen in Grantstown Lough from that day to this. At the same time, immense clouds of strange fowls made their entrance into every district of leeks and ossory, driven of course from the realms of fairyland by that fairy tempest which sprung up at the spell of the red hag of the fountain. These birds were the most beautiful ever seen, their plumage of red, green, blue, gold, every colour of the rainbow, and their flesh was found the best and sweetest ever tasted. And then they were so tame that they not only suffered themselves to be taken alive, but actually flew into the very houses of the people, and like the fishes of the lake, seemed rather to increase in numbers and excellence, until Providence revisited with plenty the rich fields of leeks and ossory, when they disappeared and never were heard of after. The plague too vanished. That fierce storm cleared the atmosphere, and flux and fever, the fines of disease, walked away hand in hand with the spectral demon of famine, and from that hour to this the plains of Old Ossory are proverbial for wealth and abundance. For now, farewell from Grantstown Lake.